So I just made this illustration of the process of perception that can kind of help us visualize the process by which we perceive things and then how pride is going to distort our self-image through this process. So we start off over here. We've got some objective true reality. This is where the true self resides, and that objective information gets taken in by our observations and is distorted by our lens. And this is done unconsciously. And we've got, for example, our pre-existing values, our priorities, our metrics of success, the cognitive biases, any emotional reactions that we might have, other subconscious influences, past experiences, which are going to inherently distort the information that we observe. So one example of this might be people who have experiences which have led them to perceive perhaps jokes at their expense as insults as opposed to an opportunity to have a jest with somebody. And this is going to inherently distort the experience of that event. So somebody who is predisposed to taking things more personally is going to perceive a reality in which this other person is a threat. They're going to get insecure, they'll get defensive, and so on. However, somebody in the same situation who tends to perceive things as more in a more lighthearted manner and isn't as defensive is going to simply perceive a joke, and that's going to radically change the experience of that situation. And oftentimes, in this case, what will happen is the way that the actual event plays out is going to be determined by the way that event is perceived, because it's going to affect how we act. And we'll look at that in a second. So once we have this perceived reality, we attribute thinking to it. So we perceive an offense. We start to think about the offense, and we think, oh, well, screw this guy, he's a freaking dick. And then we construct our beliefs, opinions, ideas, and self-image, and much more, our overall perspective on reality by thinking about this perceived reality, about this distorted reality as a result of the lens. Now, the way that we think about these things, the conclusions that we come to, are going to go on to construct the elements of the lens. So if we often perceive people as insulting us, and we think about it that way, and we react in that manner, we will reinforce that element of the lens that causes things to be distorted that way. However, let's say we think about it and we perhaps think, okay, well, maybe they're not attempting to insult us, and maybe they're actually just, joking around. And then we act out that belief as if that's how it is. We'll start to construct a lens that will distort reality in that way instead, which may be a more productive way to distort it. Or if we attribute rational thinking, or if we use rational thinking, we might be able to construct a lens that, while it never will pass information through completely undistorted, we may be able to lessen the distortions of the information that we perceive. And that's where we can work with a reality that is more representative of truth. Then whatever our thinking, we're going to construct certain mental ideas. We're going to construct perspectives in the form of thought. All this can be categorized as thought. We can use thinking in order to construct our perspective, and our perspective is a part of our thought. And this is a component, the thought component of what we're going to talk about later, which is the cognitive triangle. So now we're looking at the cognitive triangle, which is essentially the cognitive behavioral therapist's way of describing human action. And essentially there are these two factors, thought and emotion, and they're going to be the key causes of our actions. And within thought, you have all these things, as well as just thoughts themselves, the things that we say inside of our head. And then we have emotions, the feelings, or the pride and the arrogance, or the joy, and so on. And the idea of the cognitive triangle is that our emotions influence our thoughts and our actions influence our thoughts and emotions, and our thoughts influence our emotions and actions. So these three factors are very entangled, and it's the job of a cognitive behavioral therapist to help you disentangle these. And we're going to look at some strategies to do that later. But for now, we're just looking at how this is going to drive our action. So our thinking, the perspective that we develop on this distorted perceived reality, is going to influence our thoughts, and our thoughts are going to be something that influences our actions, and it's also going to influence our emotions. The biggest focus of this course is going to be looking at the emotion that is pride. And so pride can influence our lens, which is going to automatically distort the perceptions we have. And a part of this automatic distortion we could see as cognitive dissonance. And unless we attribute or we utilize thinking about our lens and about these factors, this effect is going to be much greater. But if we can contemplate our own lens, we can start to lessen it. For example, in cognitive dissonance, that's something that we can do. Recognize that we're experiencing dissonance, or recognize that we're dealing with an idea that is counter to ideas that we already hold, and then anticipate dissonance being a part of the lens, and try and counteract that with our thinking, and try and lessen that distortion by mapping out how that distortion has occurred to the subjective information. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, and we'll look more at that later. But this emotion of pride is is not only going to affect our lens and the way that we perceive reality, but it's also going to, it's an emotion that's also going to affect our thinking. And if we allow it to affect our thinking, we can go up here, it's going to affect the way that we think about our perceptions, which if we're looking at the construction of the self-image, we can come over to here, we have the idea of the self. It's going to affect our introspection, which is essentially the thinking that we perform in order to construct our self-image based on this perceived self. And as we'll talk about later, and I kind of alluded to already, there are, oh, they're not appearing, so that's great. Oh, there they are. There are two types of introspection. You have your destructive introspection, where your emotions drive your thinking, and thinking inflames emotions. This cycle distorts reality and exacerbates the effects of the lens and pride, if it is the emotion involved. And then the productive form is emotions serve as an indicator for further reflection. Thinking is performed detached from emotions, and emotions are used to motivate rationally arrived at decisions. We'll talk about all that more later, but essentially what this is saying is that there's a way that we can think about ourselves while we construct our self-image that will make our self-image more representative of our true self, and there's a way that we can use thinking to, in fact, further distort our self-image. And of course, if we further distort that, that means the lens becomes more distorted. That means our thinking becomes more distorted. Our emotions are able to more heavily influence our thinking, and so on. And yeah, I think that's, well, we can look real quickly at this. In terms of the self, these are all the factors that we're going to consider in constructing our self-image. And take a quick look at that. We've got our ideas of our past, present, future self. This is kind of what I was referring to in my discussion about quitting cigarettes.